Hello, Facebook Live. What's happening? Marcus here. It is Tuesday afternoon, and it is 4 or 5 o'clock here. We're getting ready to open. Front doors are actually open. We're not quite open yet. I want to talk about Faroe Island salmon. Faroe Island salmon. What's the deal with Faroe Island salmon? I'm just trying to log on to Instagram. I was kicked off. Or booted out, not kicked up, and here we go. All right, there we go. Instagram now as well. So, all right, Faroe Island salmon. What is the deal with Faroe Island salmon? The Faroe Islands are north of Scotland, east of Norway. I'm sorry, west of Norway. West of Norway, north of Scotland. Faroe Islands are this little cluster of islands. I don't know how many kilometers, how many miles north of Scotland or off the Norwegian coast, Norway. But it has a cluster of islands, about 50,000 people live there. They live off the ocean. That's their main income, is the ocean, the fish, seafood. So a lot of restaurants are serving Faroe Island salmon now, and it's like this designer salmon, and people are thinking, oh, wow, this is great. People have asked me recently and in the past if Faroe Island salmon is truly wild or if it's truly sustainable, as a lot of menus claim that it is. And even like you could even buy, like you can go to Restaurant Depot and go through their frozen section and see Faroe Island salmon there. And it'll say sustainably harvested or sustainably raised. If you go to the website Faroe Island does an amazing job in promoting their farm salmon. Amazing job. They have several different websites, several different blogs, several different associations that they have owned, sponsored, where you can go on and see these beautiful islands, beautiful ocean, and you'll see the nets or the pens sitting out in the water. And one of the websites says farmed in the wild or from the wild. There's something about the wild, but they're literally farmed salmon. So I'm going to run down the deal with Faroe Island salmon. So the first way you can tell if farm salmon is legit, okay, is you talk to the people who actually live there. You talk to people in the communities. You don't look at a label that says sustainably farmed, especially when it comes to salmon. You don't look at a label that says, organic or no antibiotics. You talk to the people that actually live in these communities. They have very, very different stories than the people or the marketing companies that actually market the product, all right? Scottish salmon is revered as one of the best salmons out there, the farm salmon. You go to Don Staniford's websites and you will find out that Scottish farm salmon is just an insane, terrible product, the whole industry in general. So out of all the regions that produce farm salmon, Faroe Islands probably has one of the better reputations, but here's the biggest issue, is that there's no right way to do the wrong thing. Farming salmon is very, very intensive on the environment, on the oceans. Farm salmon takes 3 times the amount of protein, so it's a 3-to-1 ratio, 3 pounds of protein to make 1 pound of salmon. The way they get that protein typically is they harvest wild fish from the ocean. So you're in a net deficit to begin with. A lot of salmon farms will say, oh, we're saving wild salmon, we're saving this is the future of aquaculture, this is the future of feeding the world, when in reality, they're actually making this massive net deficit of protein from the ocean to do this. So there's no right way to do the wrong thing. Alexandra Morton talks about that many times. She's from the West Coast, she's from British Columbia, and she has seen massive devastation when the salmon farms came in. So Faroe Islands. So talk to people that are actually there. Don Staniford from Scotland will be a guest of ours. He wasn't feeling well yesterday. Hopefully in a couple of days, we'll be able to have Don Staniford on. He has a lot of great websites out there. He's an activist. He's on the front lines. He sees what's going on firsthand. He sent me an email yesterday, the day before, that there was a Scottish scientist that basically says that farmed Scottish salmon is one of the worst things to do as far as the animals being tortured. So the biggest problem with salmon farms is we don't see the farms. We can drive by a cattle field and see cattle grazing, or we can go into Colorado or into Iowa and we'd see these mass conglomerate companies that have 5 square miles of feedlots and see all the animals standing there and not moving, and the animals are still there, they're still alive. But in salmon pens, you can't see what's going on underneath the water. So we don't see. So what happens when lice attach? Every salmon farm, no matter if it's Faroe Islands, no matter if it's Chile, no matter if it's Washington State, Maine, Canada, British Columbia, every single salmon farm has lice. That's just part of the business. That's what happens. When the lice attach themselves to the fish, they actually start eating away at the skin. So these fish develop these massive lesions if not treated. And you have to treat them with some very harsh chemicals, like a chemical called Slice, S-L-I-C-E. So they treat these, they kill everything off in that bay except for the fish, and it destroys lobster. It's a detriment to the environment when they throw these chemicals out there. So if a salmon farm says, well, we're not using antibiotics, which that's one of their claims, they're still using other things that are very, very harsh to the environment, and they still have to kill things off. So Slice is one of the things that they use for lice. If you type in on Google lice, L-I-C-E, lice lesions on farm salmon, you will find, no matter what part of the world you Google this in, or the farms pick up, the salmon have these massive lesions all over them. They basically eat away the flesh. It's terrible, terrible, very painful for the fish. So that's, scientists came out last week from Scotland and said fish farming in Scotland is cruel. It's one of the cruelest things that she knows that's going on out there, is farmed salmon. So Faroe Islands, folks, is not much different than all the salmon farms out there. The open pen nets contain open pen systems out in the ocean, because they're harvesting wild food. They're then, yeah, that's it right there, Cody. Can I just show a quick picture of that? Cody, as I'm doing this, Cody's Googling. So there's I don't know if you can see it. That's what happens with lice. That right there is what happens with lice on salmon when they go in with lice. And that happens, folks, in every salmon farm. Every salmon farm has lice. Yeah, you Google that, it came right up, right?
Yeah, gross. The other ones are a lot worse. But
that's mild. That's a very mild picture compared to what lice can do. Yeah, I mean, it's terrible. It just basically eats away the flesh out to the skin of the salmon, and just starts eating into the flesh. So what happens, Cody, a lot of times with that is the salmon farmers, the companies still harvest that and still use it for food, because they fillet it. And so if you see farm salmon, if you were to buy, let's say you had to buy farm salmon, the only time you'd buy farm salmon is if you saw the whole fish in contact, head in contact, eyes, everything in contact. Because once you take the head off, they can get rid of all of the lesions that are in the head. Once you take the skin off, they can hide all of that. And once they start processing it, making like salmon burgers, like farm salmon burgers, who knows what's going on. But their intent is to keep these fish alive, harvest it, process it, and sell it. That's their 100% intention with that. And a lot of those salmon with lesions, with those lice lesions, they get onto the market no problem. It just happens all the time. It's part of the business. So back to the Faroe Islands, folks. The Faroe Islands are no different than any other island or than any other region. They're harvesting lots of wild protein to make this. There are lice there. Now, here's one of the major detriments of the Faroe Islands. The Faroe Islands, because they were remote up there, after World War II, they dumped a lot of toxic chemicals there. And you can Google this, it's documented. They dumped a ton of stuff there. Who knows what's in the water? Another thing is, because of its remote location in the Atlantic part of the ocean there, a lot of salmon from Norway, wild salmon, Scottish, the little bit of wild salmon that's left out there actually go to the Faroe Islands to feed. That's their summer feeding grounds. So they hang out up there and feed off of there. Well, here's the biggest issue with any salmon farm that's out there in the oceans. They put these in the migratory path of wild salmon. So what happens is salmon swim by, the lice go into the wild population. The diseases, the viruses all get spread. They're all communicable. They all go into the wild population. And then from there, you have issues, and the wild salmon start dying as a result. If you go back and look since the late 80s, since the mid to late 80s, when salmon farms started exploding in Norway. It's been around since the 60s, by the way. But since the late 80s, mid 80s, salmon farms started exploding in numbers. If you watch this, we're not commercially fishing Atlantic wild salmon because the population is so low. So if their theory holds true, and they're saying that they're saving the wild salmon population by farming salmon, Look at the numbers. The numbers keep dwindling. It just keeps dwindling down of the Atlantic Ocean true wild salmon because the salmon farms are spreading the disease in the migratory path. Now what happens, the larger salmon, the adult salmon are more their immune systems are built. So they can actually probably get lice on them and maybe survive. Or when they spawn, they swim upstream. And as soon as they swim into brackish water or fresh water, the lice die. Because that's just what happens. Lice do not live in fresh water. They live in salt water. So that's an easy fix if the salmon goes to spawn. But the baby salmon, the fry, when they swim down the stream and go into the ocean and they swim past these Atlantic salmon farms, or these salmon farms, wherever they are in British Columbia, wherever they are in Washington, Norway, Scotland, Faroe Islands, these lice attach to these baby fish. Once one of those lice attach, that baby salmon it's basically gone. It does not have a chance in surviving. So that right there is the number one thing that is killing off these salmon. Cody. So that's the number one thing that's killing off these salmon are these lice and these diseases spreading out to these very small baby salmon that are out there. So this is a major issue. So the Faroe Islands, folks, is a major feeding ground for the few wild salmon that's left. So anything that the Faroe Island salmon have in these pens, they actually swim out and spread these spreads. So, folks, if we were to eliminate all the salmon farms in the Atlantic Ocean, eliminate them all, you would see all these experts agree that you would see a increase in wild salmon population because there's nothing that would interfere with the wild salmon of growing. All the diseases would be basically being eliminated out of the ocean. Now, what happens when wild salmon were to get a disease, like let's say wild salmon gets something out in the wild, the fish would become a slow swimming fish. Which means a seal would eat it, maybe a bird would eat it, something else would eat it because it wouldn't be able to get away. So the fittest species live. The fittest of that species live. So the salmon would get eaten up and then go through the ecosystem like that. But in a salmon farm, 100,000 fish will sit there with this disease and they're not getting eaten by another species. They're not getting disposed of properly. They're actually, a lot of them get into the food supply, or if they have to get put down or they die, they basically get, who knows what happens. So they go to an incinerator or they go to a whatever happens, and who knows if they get put into food. I have no idea, the dog food, cat food, I don't know, but they lose. If you just do a quick Google search and put farmed salmon mortality, Canada's farmed salmon mortality, Scotland farmed salmon mortality, you will find that the death rate is like 10, 20, 30%. It's outrageous what the death rate is, the mortality rate on farmed salmon. Scotland being probably the worst. But in the last couple years, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, the east coast of Canada, every year suffers millions and millions of salmon death from salmon farms. The algae blooms, the disease that's spreading in there, it is horrific if you read and see the news. This is not in the news much, though, folks. You have to Google search it. It'll pop up in there. So you can do mortality rate of any region of farmed salmon. You can find the mortality rates, and it is insane what's happening with farmed salmon. So now, 3 pounds of wild fish to make 1 pound of salmon. That salmon, a 20, 30% mortality rate, 15% mortality rate in that region. So now we've wasted 1 million salmon at 10, 12 pounds of fish. 10, 12 pounds of fish times 36 pounds of protein times 1 million fish. Folks, this is an insane way to think that we're going to feed the planet. It's an insane way to think that we're providing something sustainable. So when these salmon farms say we are sustainable or this or that, it is just them just saying what they want because they have a good marketing team. They have somebody backing them up, marketing, they create their own organization, they do whatever. So folks, the bottom line is the Faroe Island salmon is really not any different than any other salmon that's out there. It's all the same stuff. It's all farmed. It all has lice. It's all being fed food with high levels of chemicals in there to protect. See, one of the other problems with salmon food is Salmon is a very high-fat food. It needs a lot of fat in the diet. So when you load the food, the pellets, with all this fat, you have to stabilize the fat or else it will oxidize and turn rancid. So you have to load it with these harsh chemicals, these stabilizers, to protect the fat. So literally, if you go on right now and search Faroe Island salmon feed, you will find out that they claim they're using the best wild fish, stuff that's for human consumption only, stuff that this. You'll find out all these things that say, oh, wow, this place is doing an amazing job. But what they're not telling you is high fat in the pellets, very harsh chemicals to stabilize the fat, so it oxidizes. They're not telling you that part. It's like saying, here's a hot dog. The hot dog is made from 100% real beef, right? But only 50% of it is 100% real beef. There's still 50% of something else that's not real beef. That's fillers, corn syrup, maltodextrin, things like that. The same thing goes when it goes for the salmon feed. They're telling you, well, it's made from this, this, and this. They're just not telling you the other half that it's made with, because it wouldn't be good for marketing. They couldn't sell their product. So they're cherry picking the ingredients that they're using for the salmon feed. If you go and do this, folks, it is literally insane what's happening in farm salmon, and the governments are behind the farms because they think they're providing jobs. But again, if you literally go and talk and see these interviews and these videos that the locals do in these communities, it is shocking. Locals will sit there with their cameras. They'll take video footage of salmon farms, like in Canada, wherever it is, of mortality rates of them literally for hours just pumping dead fish out of the pens. Because when something happens, it kills the whole farm, basically. Bill Bryden, who is a regular guest of ours on here, I've interviewed him several times, he's been a guest on. He talks about in East Coast of Canada that in the summertime, there's so much dead fish, so much dead salmon in these pens, that the whole bay becomes this oil resin. And it sticks onto the rocks, and you can't go to the shore or the beaches there because it's just all just coated with this dead salmon fat resin that stinks. Same thing in Scotland. And when we interviewed Dan Stonifer, I'm sure he'll tell you, these bays totally just stink and disgusting and just dead, rotten fish, because that's what's happening. And the fish that are living are going to market. And this is the fish you're eating. And these are the fish that chefs are saying, oh, it's Faroe Island, it's Scottish salmon, it's Scottish organic salmon, it's sustainable salmon, it's Bay of Fundy, it's Nova Scotia salmon, it's this salmon. It's folks, it's all the same across the board. It's open pen, it's a detriment to the environment, it's a detriment to the fish, and it's a detriment to our health. So don't let anybody trick you into thinking that their farm salmon is drastically different. The only farm salmon that is even close to being different, but the feed content may still be in question, it still is in question, is containment system. When something's built in a containment system, it's built inland, no access to the ocean, no access to outside water. It's built inland. There's ponds that are built inside, tanks that are built inside, holding tanks. The fish get put in there. It gets a circulating system. It gets a filter. It has no access to the wild. It has nothing can get in, nothing can get out. If a disease happens, it's filtered out in the filters. It comes out, and the water's reused. And those are the best for salmon farms, but they cost 7 times more. So $1 million versus $7 million investment. These salmon farms are really not excited about building inland containment systems, despite that's just the only way. If you had to farm salmon, that is the only way to farm salmon: inland containment system, closed containment system, where you cannot get any of these germs, diseases, viruses, lice, anything out there. Now, if you also do a Google search, you'll also find that a lot of mammals suffer around these farms. Whales, sea lions, birds, all kinds of animals suffer around these farms. They put out devices for the sound, for noise pollution, to keep these animals away. Yeah, it's a whole trickle down effect. In fact, wild salmon is a true keystone species. Keystone species mean that it provides nourishment, nutrients, a foundation for hundreds of other species, from trees to bears to birds, to everything across the ecosystem. So if we were to truly lose wild salmon, especially out of the Pacific West Coast, there would be it's a massive detriment to the environment. Just Google keystone species and you'll see how many things salmon is actually connected to in the wild that is being massively suffering because salmon runs are down on the East Coast. So folks, that's it for now. I know I spoke a lot, about 20 minutes, but Faroe Island salmon, it's like every other farm salmon out there. Avoid it. Don't use it. Tell chefs not to source it, not to use it, and not mislead people. All right, folks, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you later.